There are moments that split a life in two. Not the loud ones, not the ones you see arriving from a distance with all their noise and their obvious consequence. The quiet ones, the ones that happen in a room that is perfectly still, with a fire burning low in the corner and rain moving against the window glass, in the voice of a man who speaks the most destructive words of your life with the complete, unhurried calm of someone ordering a meal. Saren Vale would remember the quiet more than anything else. She had come to the great hall of Iron Hollow Keep at the wrong hour. She had known it immediately. The council was still in session, 6 elders seated along the long table with the particular alertness of men who considered information their most valuable currency. She had hesitated at the threshold. She had almost turned back. She had not turned back, because she had been carrying this truth for 3 weeks. She had held it against her chest like something she was afraid to set down, testing the words in the quiet of the healer's wing at night, turning them over until they felt like something she could actually say. She had a son growing inside her. She had a man who had told her, 4 months ago with his hand over hers and his amber eyes entirely honest, that he would find a way, that she should trust him. That everything they had built was real enough to hold whatever the world threw at it. She had believed him. So she walked across the threshold. Kalen Dusk looked up from his seat at the head of the table. He saw her face. Something moved through his expression, fast, complicated, gone before she could name it. He said something low to the elder at his right. The elder, a narrow man named Osric with eyes like a bird that had learned which things were worth eating, looked at her the way a man looks at a problem that has arrived before he finished solving it. They were all still there, all 6 of them, watching. She had not planned it this way. She had planned softness, a private fire. The man she knew in the healer's wing at midnight, not the one at the head of this table. But she had already crossed the threshold, and she had been told her whole life that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something mattered more. So she looked at Kaelan, and she offered the truth with both hands entirely open, the way you offer something precious to someone you trust completely to receive it. "I am carrying your child," she said. The fire in the corner made its small sound. Rain moved on the windows. The 6 council elders were statues. Kaelan did not move. She watched the line of his shoulders and tried to read him the way she had learned to read him over 16 months of stolen hours and honest conversations, and a bond that had formed between them the way true things formed. Without either of them designing it, without announcement, in the quiet space between 2 people who had each stopped performing for the other. She could not read him now. He rose from the head of the table. He walked toward her, not the way he walked in private where something in his stride was open, where the Alpha King and the man had not yet separated for the day. This walk was deliberate, built for the room, built for the 6 sets of watching eyes behind him. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she could see his face with complete clarity. And what she saw in his face was the single most destructive thing she had encountered in her 28 years of living. Nothing, absolute nothing. Not anger, which would have meant she still registered as something worth anger. Not guilt, which would have meant some part of him understood what this cost her. Not even the cold calculation she had braced herself for, which would have been a kind of honesty. Just a man who had already made a decision and was delivering the result. "You mean nothing to me." The words were not raised. They were not performed. He said them the way he said decisions in council sessions, with the flat, final authority of someone for whom the question has already been closed. "This child," he continued, his voice dropping so only she could hear, which she understood was not mercy but management, "cannot be what Iron Hollow needs. You cannot be what this seat requires. An heir born to an Omega with no bloodline, no pack, no political standing, is not an heir the Northern Packs will bow to. What we were was a mistake. You will make the appropriate arrangements and you will be discreet about it." She waited for him to finish the way you wait out weather. When he was done, she looked at him for 3 long seconds. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was memorizing, because some part of her already understood she was going to need this image later. The full shape of it, every detail of the man who had chosen, in the most precise and calculated way possible, to make her disappear. She turned. She walked to the great hall's iron doors without hurrying, without looking at the 6 elders, without performing anything at all. She stopped, hand on the cold iron. "You will spend the rest of your life learning what you did tonight," she said, not loudly, not to wound him, only because it was the simplest and most accurate sentence left in her body. "Not because I need that for myself, because your wolf will not let you forget it. And wolves, Kaelin, are honest about everything their owners are not." He said nothing. She pushed the door open and walked into the rain. She made it 3 streets. The bond rejection hit her like something structural failing. Not pain exactly, but the specific, catastrophic sensation of a foundation giving way beneath a building that had been standing on it for over a year. Her wolf had been split open. The formal words Kaelin had spoken in the Great Hall, the ancient alpha invocation that severed a declared fated pairing by authority, were doing what such words always did, dismantling the receiving wolf from the inside out. She went down against a stone wall with both hands pressed flat to the surface and could not get up again. She could not get up for 11 minutes. A woman found her, traveling healer, silver-haired, older than anyone Saren had dealt with eyes that skipped past shock entirely and went straight to what was needed. Her name was Brynja. She asked no unnecessary questions. She got Saren inside. She kept her wolf alive through the worst hours of the night with the calm, methodical competence of someone who had seen this before and understood that what the wolf needed in these hours was not comfort but anchor. In the morning, when the worst had passed, Brynja sat at the edge of the bed and told Saren the truth she deserved to have. By all biological law, the rejection should have fractured your wolf completely. Brynja's voice was careful and precise. The only reason it didn't is what you're carrying. The alpha blood in the child produced enough of a bond echo to hold you together. Saren stared at the ceiling. The child Kaelin had called a mistake was the reason she was still breathing. She lay with that for exactly long enough. Then she sat up. She put her feet on the floor. She breathed in once slowly through a chest that still felt like something had moved inside it that was not supposed to move. "I'm leaving Ironhollow," she said. Brynja already on her feet. "I know I'm coming with you." "You don't." "I know I don't." Brynja was already moving toward the door. "I'm choosing to anyway." By the time Ironhollow woke to its morning business, Saren Vale was already 2 miles down the western road. She did not look back at the keep. There was nothing in that direction that she needed. Only forward, only the road, only what she was going to build from what she had left. She had not come to Ironhollow looking for anything, except somewhere her skills would be fully used. That was the truth of it, not a romantic story about destiny drawing her north, not some ancient wolf legend about fated pairs finding each other across territories. She had arrived at Ironhollow's gate as part of a negotiated arrangement between the keep's medical council and the Eastern Healer Guilds, skilled hands for passage rights along the trade roads. She had been assigned here the way a craftsperson is assigned to a commission, because her record was the strongest in her group, and the commission required the strongest candidate. She was an Omega from the eastern scattered settlements, where pack hierarchy was a theory rather than a practice. She had no family name worth speaking, no political standing. She carried her worth in her hands and in the specific, unusual gift she had possessed since childhood, the ability to sense without touching where the real wound was, not the visible injury, the one underneath. The one a patient had learned to protect so thoroughly that even they had stopped knowing it was there. She had healed 8 wolves in her first month at Ironhollow that other healers had categorized as untreatable. She had done it quietly, without announcement. She had gone home after each of them, written her notes, made her tea, and gone to sleep. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was trying to do good work, and that turned out to be the most impressive thing of all. Kaelin Dusk appeared in the doorway of her healer's wing on a night in late autumn, 2 months after her arrival, at the particular hour when the keep had wound down and the corridors were finally quiet. He was in plain clothes, no crown, No escort. He had the build and the amber eyes of an alpha, and the expression of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had run out of a specific type of energy, not physical, but the kind that keeps you from noticing how tired you actually are. She looked up from her supply inventory. "Are you injured?" "No." She looked at him more carefully. Healers read bodies the way other people read faces. She cataloged what she saw, the particular set of his shoulders that meant long-term weight, not fresh strain. The stillness around his eyes that came from a man who had trained himself not to show things in public until it had begun to cost him the ability to feel them in private. She reached behind her, poured a cup of the evening herb blend she kept simmering for patients who arrived not knowing what they needed, and set it on the edge of the nearest work table. She went back to her inventory. He sat down in the corner chair. He stayed for 2 hours. He came back the following week, and the week after that. And Saren, who was not a woman who performed warmth she did not feel, simply let the pattern establish itself without commentary. He talked when he had something to say. She answered when she had an honest answer. They were quiet together in the specific way of two people who have discovered, without planning to, that the other person's silence is not uncomfortable. He told her about the council, the real version, not the one he gave in sessions. The way every decision he made sat inside a web of consequence that stretched backward 3 generations and forward another 3, and the weight of that web on a man who had been placed inside it at age 19, when his father died without ever once saying the word proud in his son's direction. She told him about the Eastern settlements, about the healer master who had taken her in at 9 years old when her pack burned and had taught her, with zero sentimentality and complete practicality, that her gift was not magic and it was not luck. It was attention. It was the willingness to be present with someone's pain without flinching away from the parts that were inconvenient. "Why did you come here specifically?" he asked one night, with the low fire and the rain on the windows and the particular quality of a question that has been sitting in a pocket for a while before coming out. "The guild assigned me here," she said. "But before the assignment, if you could have gone anywhere." She put down what she was writing. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "Somewhere that needed the best I had. Iron Hollow has more wolves per acre than any territory in the northern reaches. That means more pain, more people who need someone paying attention." He looked at her for a long time after that, not calculating, not performing, the look of a man who has encountered something he did not know he was waiting for and is experiencing the specific strangeness of recognition. The bond formed on a night in early spring, 4 months into the pattern they had built. She had fallen asleep in her chair while he was reading aloud from an old Iron Hollow medical text he claimed to find dry, but had been returning to for 3 sessions now. She was aware of the moment she dropped into sleep, aware of it from inside the sleep, the way you know you have closed a door while still hearing the room you left behind. She was aware, also, of the shift in the quality of his attention. The reading stopped, and in the silence she felt him look at her, not the polite, managed attention of a man being careful about the professional arrangement between them, something that had given up on being careful and was simply looking at her the way he actually felt about looking at her. She woke, their eyes met across the low fire. The bond moved between them like the moment a compass needle stops trembling and locks to true north. Not a sound, not a sensation exactly, more like a room that has always had one wall slightly wrong suddenly having all 4 walls be correct. The particular rightness of a thing that was always supposed to happen finally happening. She could feel his steadiness, his depth, the precise weight of everything he had been carrying and the enormous, private exhaustion of carrying it alone. He could feel, she would learn later what he had felt in that moment, something he described once quietly as the first peace he could remember since before his father died. "We have to be careful," he said, because even then, even in that moment, he saw the obstacle first. "I know," she said. "The council, the noble families, the question of an heir. Saren, there are structures here that predate both of us." "I know." He reached across the space between their chairs and put his hand over hers. "I will find a way, I promise you that. Give me time." She looked at his hand over hers. She looked at his face. She believed him. She believed him completely and without reservation, which was the part of the story she would spend the longest time understanding afterward. Not because she was naive, because he had given her, in 4 months of honest conversation and a bond that had just turned real between them, every reason to believe that he was capable of being the man who kept that promise. He had been that man. Until the night he chose not to be. The road west out of Ironhollow was not a kind road. It had been made by use rather than design, a path worn into the earth by generations of feet and cartwheels, and the particular stubbornness of people who needed to travel and had no better option. It collected mud in the low places. It offered no shelter from the wind that came off the northern ridges in sharp, horizontal gusts. At the edge of packed territory, where the old boundary posts stood in their weathered row, the road stopped being maintained entirely and became something closer to a suggestion. Saren walked it without complaining because she had been walking difficult roads since she was 9 years old and had long since made peace with the fact that the roads worth taking were rarely the comfortable ones. Brynja walked beside her. They did not speak much in those first hours. Brynja had the elder healer's deep understanding of what silence was for, not the absence of something, but the presence of something else. The active, working process of a person deciding what they were going to do with the shape their life had just taken. The bond scar pulled on the left side of Saren's chest with every cold breath she drew. Not pain. The specific, structural sensation of absence. The place where something had been woven into the tissue of her wolf and had then been cut out, leaving the surrounding tissue with no idea what to do with the space. She breathed through it. She kept walking. She understood, with the clarity of a healer who also happened to be the patient, that the worst of it had passed in Brynja's spare room the previous night. What remained was survivable. She had survived worse and with less. What she was less prepared for was the moment, at the second boundary post, when she pressed her palm flat against her stomach and felt the answer. She had suspected for 2 weeks. Healers always knew their own bodies with a precision that non-healers found unsettling. The exhaustion, arriving in the second week after the night in question. The specific, persistent nausea that happened at precisely 3 in the afternoon regardless of what she had eaten. The bone-deep sense, which she had not been ready to examine directly, that something inside her had changed in the irreversible way that growing things changed. She pressed her palm flat and closed her eyes and confirmed what she already knew. Brynja watched her. "How far along?" she asked, because Brynja was always going to ask the practical question first. 6 weeks, Saren said. A pause in the wind. "What do you want to do?" Brynja asked. No judgment in either direction. A clean question, asked by a woman who understood that clean questions were a form of respect. Saren opened her eyes. She looked at the boundary post under her palm. At the road ahead, disappearing into the border territories, toward the place on the old maps where the jurisdiction lines went vague, and the questions people asked each other became fewer. "I'm keeping the child," she said. Not a decision made in grief. Not defiance, though there was some in it. Something simpler and more absolute than either of those things. The decision of a woman who had been put on the earth with a healer's gift and a fierce, uncompromising love for the things she chose to protect. The decision of a woman who had just learned that the man she trusted most was capable of choosing the political architecture over her, and had decided, with complete clarity, that she was going to raise the living proof of that choice to be everything Kaelan had been too afraid to be. She took her hand off the post. She walked. They found Duskvale on the 4th evening. It was not a beautiful town. It sat at the edge of the Western Territories like something practical rather than designed stone buildings in the functional style of border settlements, a weekly market, a river that ran cold and fast even in autumn, a population with the particular self-sufficiency of people who had gathered at the edges of established power and had no interest in being found by it. It asked nothing of newcomers beyond basic civic decency. It offered nothing automatic. What it gave you was space. the specific, valuable space of a place where your history had not arrived before you. Saren stood at the edge of it in the early evening light with the wind pulling at her traveling coat and felt, beneath the grief and the physical pull of the bond scar, and the exhaustion of 4 days of walking, something she had not expected. She felt possibilities. She found a room above a dye house run by a woman named Halla, whose hands were stained permanently at the knuckles, and who had suffered from a bone condition in both wrists for 3 years that 2 guild healers had classified as irreversible. Saren spent 4 evenings reviewing the full history, prescribed a treatment that worked from the cartilage outward rather than the surface in, and had results inside a month that made Halla look at her with the specific expression people wore when something they had stopped believing in had turned out to be real after all. After that, rent was no longer a topic. Word spread the way word spread in small places, first slowly, then with the sudden gathering momentum of a tide. The healer above Halla's, people said. The one from the east. The Omega with the quiet eyes who knew where the real wound was before she touched you. Who had come from somewhere else and clearly had reasons she wasn't discussing and clearly did not require you to ask about them. Nobody asked. Duskville had the particular courtesy of a town that had been built by people who understood what it was like to have a past you weren't ready to explain. She built her practice through the winter and into the spring with the same focused, daily energy she had always brought to her work, and the pregnancy made everything harder and she did it anyway, and the doing of it was the thing that kept her honest about who she was. She was not a woman who had been destroyed. She was a woman who had been set back to the foundations and was discovering, with the particular satisfaction of someone paying close attention, that her foundations were extremely solid. She thought about Kaylin precisely as much as was unavoidable and not 1 second more. When the thought came, she let it come, and then she let it pass, the way weather passed. Not suppression, not forgetting, just the daily, conscious decision to give her energy to the life in front of her rather than the wound behind. Saren was born on a spring night with rain on the roof and Brynja in the corner of the room saying, "You are doing fine," in the specific tone of someone for whom this was not reassurance but statement of fact. When it was done and the boy was placed in her arms, Saren looked down. And she understood, in the way that a healer understands things that are too large for the mind but not too large for the body, through her hands, through her wolf, through every instinct she had ever been born with, that everything she had been building toward for 28 years had been building toward this. Not toward a man, not toward a bond or a keep or a position. Toward this particular small creature, this warm, serious, dark-haired person who looked up at her face with the unfocused gaze of a newborn, and then, slowly, as if he had made a decision, focused. His eyes were amber. Kaylin's amber. She looked at that for a long moment. She let herself feel it completely. The grief and the love and the strange, aching recognition of seeing a man you had loved and lost in the face of the best thing that love had ever produced. Then she pressed her lips to his forehead. "I will never leave you," she told him, "and no one in this world will ever make you feel like you came from nothing, because you didn't. You came from me, and I have never been nothing." She named him Raven, the old settlement word for the space between dark and light, the specific moment when the night hadn't quite left and the dawn hadn't quite arrived. She chose it because she wanted him to know, from his first breath, that being between things was not the same as belonging to neither. She did not know yet what Raven was going to become. She only knew that she was going to love him without reservation and without apology. She started immediately. Raven was different in ways that arrived quietly and then became impossible to ignore. He was not loud about it. That was the first and most consistent thing about him, the quality of his presence, which was not the wide-open, everything-is-new energy of other children his age, but something more akin to the quality of an old forest. Still, present, aware of things at a depth that did not match the size of the creature doing the being aware. He spoke in complete sentences before most children in Duskville had found their first reliable words. Not because Saren had coached him. She had spoken to him from his first day the way she would speak to anyone she respected, clearly and honestly, and without the flattening, simple vowel language people used with infants. But because Raven had apparently decided that communication was worth doing properly. His first word had been the healer's term for a flowering plant Saren used in joint treatments. He had pointed at it from across the room at 7 months and named it with the calm precision of someone confirming information they had already acquired from another source. Saren had set down what she was writing and looked at her son for a very long time. "Right," she had said finally, "so that's how it is." The animals were the second thing. It began with the cats that collected in the alley behind Halla's. They had always been alley cats, cautious, self-sufficient, operating on the specific social contract of creatures who have learned to coexist with humans without fully trusting them. They began appearing at Raven's window when he was 8 months old, not lurking at the sill, arriving at it, directly, with the specific confidence of creatures responding to a summons they trusted. By 14 months, the phenomenon had expanded beyond cats and beyond the alley. A lame horse from the livery at the north end of the market walked 3 streets on its own one morning and stood outside the practice door until Brynja, arriving for her morning rounds, found it there, and went to fetch Saren with the expression of someone who has decided to simply accept what is happening and ask questions later. Raven had been sitting at the front window, watching the horse, with the steady attention of someone who had been expecting it. What happened after, the way the animal calmed, the way a hip that had been grinding wrong for months began to sit correctly over the following week, the way Raven had simply sat near it for 20 minutes with his small hand resting on its neck, and looked at Saren afterward with amber eyes that said nothing unusual had occurred, was the moment Saren understood that her son's gift was not the same as hers. Hers was perception, the ability to see truly into a body in distress. His was something she did not have a name for yet, something that reached into living things at the level below disease, below injury, at the place where the will to be well either existed or didn't. And whatever Raven said to that place in the language he was apparently fluent in, it listened. She watched this. She wrote nothing down about it. She told no one outside Brynja, who received the information with the nod of a woman, adding it to a mental file she had been building since the night Raven was born. The third thing was the knowing. Raven knew things before they happened. Not dramatically, not the theatrical prophecy of the old pack legends, where a seer convulsed and spoke in riddles, and everyone stood around looking solemn. Raven simply stated facts about things that had not yet occurred, in the tone of someone confirming information that seemed straightforwardly obvious to them, and waited patiently for the world to catch up. He told Saren 3 days before Brynja's letter arrived from the eastern border that the old woman with the silver hair was coming. He told Halla that the roof on the east side of the dye house was going to leak before the first heavy rain of autumn. It did. He told a man named Gorvin, who had come to the practice for a chest complaint, and had been attempting with decreasing success to hide the grief of a recent loss, that the person he was missing was not suffering anymore. Gorvin had stared at him. "How do you know that?" Raven had looked at him with those amber eyes, patient and direct. "She told me to tell you," he said, and then he had picked up his wooden blocks and returned to the arrangement he had been working on, apparently satisfied that he had delivered the relevant information and his work here was done. Saren had walked Gorvin out afterward and spent the rest of the evening sitting with what her son was. She had also, that evening, checked on the bond scar for the first time in months, not because she wanted to, because Raven's gifts were connected to it, and she was a healer, and healers did not ignore things because they were uncomfortable to look at. The scar was still there, a silence on the left side of her chest where the bond's warmth had been, but there was something new in the texture of it, a faint resonance, like the low note of a bell that has stopped ringing but still carries its sound in the metal. She pressed her hand over her heart and felt it pulse once. It was not coming from her. It was coming from Raven. Bond echoes. She had read about them, the residue, a severed faded bond left in the blood of children conceived within it. She had read about them the way you read about rare weather conditions, academically, without expectation of personal relevance. She lay down that night with the understanding that the bond between her and Kaelin Dusk was not, in fact, as gone as she had believed. It had not died. It had simply relocated. It lived in their son now, loudly, without any of her careful management, without walls or distance or the daily decision to look away. Raven was connected to his father in a way that 3 years of silence and 200 miles of distance could not interrupt. And Raven, she understood this with the certainty she brought to things that were simply and irreversibly true, was going to say so out loud one day. In the direct and unstoppable way, he said all things that were true, and she was going to have to be ready for that. She was not yet ready. But she was, in the way she had been born to be, paying attention. In Ironhollow Keep, everything looked the way it was supposed to look. This was the sentence Kaelin Dusk had been saying to himself for 2 years, in the way a man repeats a thing he needs to remain true. The pack was stable. The northern alliances held. The trade roads were open and the winter provisions were sound, and the border disputes that had been simmering for a decade had been settled by agreements he had personally negotiated. His council sessions were productive. His authority was unquestioned. From the outside, the Blackthorn reign was the picture of a strong, capable alpha entering the most productive decade of his leadership. From the inside, he was disappearing. He knew this with the specific, merciless clarity of a man who had trained himself, through years of council preparation, to observe things accurately even when accuracy was painful. He was not fooling himself about what was happening to him. He was simply running out of options for making it stop. The bond rejection had cost him more than he had known it would. He had understood it theoretically, had understood that the formal severing of a true fated pair came with consequences, that it was not a neutral act, the way signing a treaty was a neutral act. He had told himself that the consequences were manageable, that the wolf in him would adjust, that what he had built in those 16 months with Saren was real but not irreplaceable, that the political architecture he was protecting was worth the cost. He had understood none of that correctly. His wolf had gone from a presence to a weight, from the natural, invisible companion of 23 years to something he could feel dragging at the edge of every decision. The alpha instincts that had once been as reliable as breathing now required conscious effort to access. In council sessions, he constructed certainty out of will alone, because the certainty that used to be innate had gone somewhere he couldn't follow, and showing the council a room without a floor was not something the Ironhollow line had ever permitted itself. He had taken Vesna Oakholt as a political mate 7 months after Saren left. Vesna was sharp and composed and entirely clear-eyed about what she was entering. She was also, within 3 months of the arrangement, entirely aware of what she had not been told. The bond would not complete. He tried. He committed to trying with the same controlled, deliberate energy he brought to difficult council negotiations. His wolf refused. Not with violence, not with the dramatic protest of a creature in distress, with the specific, inflexible quietness of something operating below instruction, something acting on instinct so fundamental that no degree of rational override could reach it. His wolf knew the difference between a political arrangement and something true, and it had simply decided, without room for appeal, that it was not going to pretend otherwise. He stopped trying after the 5th month. Vesna, to her credit, did not push for a conversation he wasn't ready for. She watched him with eyes that understood more than she said, and maintained the arrangement with a professional grace that he respected deeply, and could not, in his most honest private moments, come close to deserving. One evening, after a particularly long session, she set down her cup with the specific sound of a woman who has finished being patient. "Tell me about her," she said. He did not move. "There is nothing to tell," he said. Kaelin, his name in her mouth with the particular weight of a person who has decided they are done with the performance. "I have been watching you become less of yourself for 2 years. I am not asking to wound you. I am asking because I am a person in this arrangement, and I deserve to understand the full shape of what that arrangement actually is." The fire crackled, rain moved on the stone walls. And he told her, not everything, but enough. The healer's wing. The midnight conversations that had begun as something practical and become the only hours in his week that felt real. The bond forming without his permission and feeling, when it arrived, like the first thing that had been entirely honest in a decade. The night she came to him with the truth and he had looked at her, had looked at her, knowing what she was to him, knowing what the bond meant, knowing that the child she carried was real and alive and his, and chosen the council's opinion over all of it. You formally rejected your true fated mate, Vesna said when he finished. Not accusation, comprehension, in front of witnesses, because you were afraid of Osric and the elder council. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she rose and walked to the window and looked out at Ironhollow in the dark, and when she turned, something had shifted in her expression. The look of a woman arriving at a conclusion she has been approaching for some time and has finally reached. Then the council, Vesna said carefully, is responsible for what this has cost everyone, and so are you, and I would like to know what you intend to do about both of those things. He had no answer that night. His answer arrived the following morning, when Aldrich Thane knocked on the door of his private study before the household had woken, carrying the weight of something in his expression that Kaelan had only seen on his captain's face twice in 12 years of service. Aldrich told him about Duskvale, about Raven, about what he had seen with his own eyes in that small border practice, the amber eyes, the alpha markers, the impossible precision of a 2-year-old stillness. And then he told him about Maelys Grundorn. Kaelan sat very still through all of it. Council intelligence had been moving on the western borders for 3 weeks, asking questions that were becoming specific in the way that questions became specific when they were no longer mapping the territory but closing on a target. An Omega healer, a child, a border town that had appeared in the trade records 3 years ago and not before. Maelys has a legal mechanism, Aldrich said. An unclaimed alpha child outside Pact jurisdiction, under Statute 714, is subject to council registration and assessment. What assessment means in practice when Maelys is conducting it? I know what it means, Kaelan said. He stood up. He did not call for the council. He did not convene a session. He did not do any of the things his position technically required. He went to the stable, and he saddled his own horse in the early morning quiet, and he was on the western road before his household guard had completed its first rotation. Aldrich caught up at the city boundary. He said nothing for the first mile. She won't want to see you, he said finally. I know. She has built something real without you, something that belongs to her. I know that. Then what? Because Maelys reaches her in 2 weeks, Kaelan said, and because I have spent 2 years calling what I did a difficult decision, and I have not believed that description for a single day. He paused. The road opened ahead of them into the border territories, the sky above it gray and cold and honest. I don't deserve her. I know that. I am going because she deserves to have someone between her and what Maelys is going to do when he finds them. And I am the only someone with the authority to stop it. Aldrich was quiet. Then and after that. Kaelan looked at the road. After that, he said, I will accept whatever she decides I deserve. He rode harder. Aldrich had gone to Duskville 3 weeks before Kaelan, and alone, and without asking permission. He told Kaelan this the morning he described what he had found. He told it plainly, without apology, in the specific manner of a man who was prepared to accept the consequences of a decision he did not regret. Kaelan had listened to this with the expression of a man who understood that his captain had just done something technically insubordinate for reasons that were, in every way that mattered, correct. What Aldrich did not tell Kaelan, what had happened inside that small Duskville practice that he kept in a private place, because it was not his story to share, only his to carry, was the conversation he had with Raven. He had not expected the child to affect him the way the child affected him. He had expected to see an alpha child with markers, which was biologically significant and politically important, and not something Aldrich was unprepared for. He had been captain of Ironhollow for 12 years. He had assessed more wolves of more kinds than most people encountered in a lifetime. He was not a man who was easily disrupted by the unexpected. He had walked into Saren's practice and looked across the room at a 2-year-old sitting on the floor with a row of wooden blocks, and the first thing that happened, before his eyes, before his analytical mind, before anything deliberate, was that his wolf went quiet. Not alarmed, not wary, quiet in the specific way of something in the presence of something with undeniable authority. The wolf in him recognized what the man in him was still processing, that the creature on the floor was something old in a small body, and something with a power that had not yet decided what shape it was going to take. Raven had looked up from his blocks. He had looked at Aldrich with those amber eyes, Kaelin's amber, but with something in the quality of the gaze that was entirely its own, with the patient, measuring attention of a scholar encountering a new piece of information. Then he had said, clearly and without any of the tentative quality of children presenting uncertain observations, "The broken wolf sent you." Aldrich had not spoken for a moment. Saren across the room had gone very still. "Yes," Aldrich had said finally, because it was true and Raven clearly had no interest in anything that wasn't true. Raven had nodded once, with the satisfied air of someone whose working theory has been confirmed, and returned to his blocks. Later, after Aldrich had delivered his warning, after Saren had received it with the composed stillness of a woman who had already half known it was coming, but still needed a moment with the full weight of it, after he had set his contact information on her desk and risen to leave, Raven had looked up one more time. "Tell the broken wolf," he said, with the calm certainty he brought to all statements he considered simply true, "that the road is not as long as he thinks." Aldrich had carried that for 3 weeks without knowing what to do with it. Now, riding west beside Kaelin on the road toward Duskvale, he understood what it had meant. Saren received Aldrich's warning in the way she received all difficult things, by going very still and then going to work on it. She sat with his contact information for the better part of an evening. She checked on Raven, who was sleeping with his usual perpendicular conviction. She went back to her desk. The warning was real. She had known in the abstract that Duskville's invisibility was not permanent. She had not allowed herself to examine that abstract too closely, because examining it had no productive outcome until it had an actual time frame attached to it. Now it had a time frame. Maylis Grundorn's people were within weeks of narrowing their search to a specific name and a specific town. What Saren was less prepared for was the feeling that came with knowing. Not fear, though fear was present. Something more complicated than fear. The understanding that the two worlds she had been holding apart by sheer force of will and distance were about to find each other whether she chose it or not. And the deeper, more inconvenient understanding that she had known, in some part of herself she had not given permission to speak, that they were always going to. She folded Aldrich's information carefully, and placed it in the small cedar box where she kept things that needed to be findable. She went to check on Raven again. He had not moved from his perpendicular position. His breathing was the steady, complete breathing of a child who trusted entirely that the world was safe, because the person who had made it safe for him was still in the building. She stood in the doorway for a long time. "You will not be taken anywhere," she told him silently. "I do not care what old statutes Maylis Grundorn has in his leather case. I do not care what the council calls an unclaimed alpha child. You are claimed. You have been claimed since the first breath you took." She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. And in the distance, 200 miles of road between them, a bond scar on the left side of her chest that pulsed once, faint and directional, somewhere in Ironhollow. Kaelin Dusk was not sleeping either. The morning Kaelin Dusk arrived in Duskville, the market was in full session. He came through the eastern entrance on foot. He had left the horse at the border post, with Aldrich 2 paces behind him, and the particular, contained stillness of a man who has been riding hard for 2 days, and has arrived at the place he has been riding toward, and does not yet know what he is going to find or whether he will be allowed to stay. The crowd gave way around him the way wolf populations gave way around undeniable alpha presence, instinctively, without knowing they were doing it. He had dressed plainly. He had made no announcement. He was simply a man in traveling clothes walking through a border market in the early morning, and yet the crowd parted for him the way water parted around something moving with purpose. He was not looking for a specific sign. He was following the bond. He had been following the bond since the first mile outside Ironhollow, when something that had been a scar in his chest for 2 years had shifted imperceptibly at first, then with increasing clarity into something directional. Not healed, not restored, but alive in a way it had not been, pointing the way a compass pointed without drama or preference, simply with the absolute accuracy of something doing what it was made to do. It brought him to the center of Duskvale's market at the third stall from the eastern entrance. And then it stopped. Not because the direction had changed, because the destination was here. The scent hit him before his eyes found them. His own bloodline, alpha markers so concentrated, and so strong that they registered in him before he consciously processed what he was registering. The way your hand comes off a hot surface before your mind has finished the thought. He turned. Raven was 2 stalls away. He was on Saren's hip, holding a length of braided cord he had apparently acquired from the textile merchant beside them, examining it with the methodical interest he apparently brought to all things worth examining. Small, dark-haired, serious in the specific, innate way that no one teaches a child, the way it simply was. And then without warning, without Kaelin making a sound or moving a muscle, Raven's amber eyes came up. They found him across the market with the absolute, undistracted precision of a compass finding north. Not confusion, not the uncertain recognition of a child encountering a stranger, something older than that, something that lived in the place below memory and experience in the deep structure of the bond echoes in his blood. He knew. He had always known, in the way he seemed to know all things from the inside before the evidence arrived. He looked at his father. The braided cord fell from his hand, and he did not notice it fall. Kaelin's wolf did not surge. It did not lunge against his chest or fight for the surface, or do any of the dramatic things that wolves in distress were known to do. What it did was quieter than that. What it did was arrive, returning from whatever reduced, sustaining depth it had been occupying for 2 years, with the simple, complete recognition of something that had found its orientation after a very long time in the wrong direction. Aldrich put a steadying hand on his arm, said nothing. Then Saren turned. She followed her son's gaze across the market, and her eyes found Kaelin and the world, for one suspended, impossible second, when entirely still. He had told himself on the road, in the specific, practical way of a man preparing himself for the thing he needed to be prepared for, that she would be changed. That 2 years of building a life alone while grieving a bond rejection would leave marks. That he should not expect the Saren he remembered and should not, under any circumstances, behave as if what he remembered was what he was owed. He had told himself this. He had not fully understood it until this moment. She was not the woman he had sent away. The woman he had sent away had been open at the edges in a way that was part of her particular beauty. This woman had been shaped by the months and the work and the grief and the raising of a child alone and the daily, conscious decision to love well what she had been given and release what had been taken. And what the shaping had produced was something harder and more complete and more entirely present than anything he had seen in a person before. She did not look wounded. She looked finished. In the way a blade was finished, in the way anything that has been through the process that makes it what it was always supposed to be looked finished. She shifted Raven higher on her hip. She turned away from Kaelin without hurrying, without the performance of being unaffected, with the simple, unhurried pace of a woman who had been expecting this eventually and had decided it would not surprise her. She walked toward the market's exit. Kaelin followed, at a distance, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to pretend. She stopped outside the door of her practice. She turned. Raven looked at Kaelan with those steady amber eyes. He did not reach. He did not look away. He simply looked with the patience of something that had already decided but was giving the situation room to confirm itself. "You should not be here," Saren said. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of 2 years of work, not the steadiness of someone who was not feeling anything. He understood the difference. "I know," he said. "Then, Maley's Grundorn's people are 12 days from this door." He said it directly, without softening it, because she deserved the full truth without the management. "They are carrying documentation under old statute that gives them the right to take him. I could not let them arrive before I did." A silence. "And if I tell you to leave anyway?" He looked at her. He did not construct anything in his expression. He let her see the full, unmanaged truth of a man standing in the wreckage of his own decisions, with nothing left to hide behind. "Then I stay at the edge of this town, and I make sure nothing reaches you from that direction. I am not here to ask to be let back in. I am here because, regardless of what I deserve and regardless of what you decide, he will not be unsafe because of what I did. That is not something I am willing to negotiate." The silence stretched. Raven leaned forward from Saren's hip. He extended his small hand toward Kaelan with the direct, uncomplicated certainty of a child who has decided something and has no interest in revisiting the decision. "Papa," he said. Not a question, a statement, the same flat, accurate tone he used for all things he considered simply true. Saren closed her eyes for one brief moment. When she opened them, something in her expression had shifted, not toward forgiveness, toward honesty, toward the acknowledgement of a truth that was in the room regardless of what she preferred. "Come in," she said. "My house, my rules. You do not make a single decision about my son without me in the room." "Understood," he said. He stepped across the threshold. Raven closed his small fingers around Kaelan's index finger the moment he was close enough, and held on with the complete, settled confidence of a child who has done what he set out to do and is satisfied. Kaelan looked down at his son's hand. 2 years. He had spent 2 years in the specific, grinding ruin of a life he had dismantled with his own authority. And his son, who had every reason in the world to feel nothing for him, who had been raised in the absence he created, who knew him only as the man whose blood he carried, had taken his hand. As if it were the easiest thing in the world. As if it had always been going to go this way. The fever came on the second night after Kaelan's arrival. Saren had not been sleeping well since he came. Not from distress, or not only from distress, from the specific alertness of a woman who had spent 2 years alone in her vigilance, and had not yet recalibrated to the presence of another person in the perimeter of the thing she was protecting. She lay in the room at the end of the corridor and listened to the small sounds of the practice settling in the cold, and the occasional distant noise of Duskville at night, and the quality of silence from Raven's room, which was the silence she had learned to read the way she read everything, for what it contained rather than what it merely was. At the second hour after midnight, the silence changed. She was at his door before she had consciously processed the change. She pressed her palm to his forehead. The heat under her hand was not the mild warmth of a child who had kicked his covers off. It was structural, deep, the kind that came from inside the blood rather than from the body's surface temperature, which meant it was not an ordinary fever. Alpha fever. She had read about it extensively, had never treated it because it was rare and because it required. She understood this with the clinical clarity that overrode every other feeling in the room. Alpha presence. Not medicine, not herbs, not anything in her considerable kit. The wolf's blood in a young alpha in distress responded to external alpha presence in ways that no compound could replicate. It needed to hear, through the specific frequency of alpha speech and touch, that the threat was being managed. She needed Kaelan. She stood in Raven's doorway with that understanding sitting in her chest like a stone she had to choose to put down. She sent Brynja to get him. He arrived within 3 minutes, still dressed. She understood without it needing to be said that he had not been sleeping either. He took in the room in one practiced assessment, looked at Raven on the bed, looked at Saren, and asked one question. "What do you need?" She told him. He nodded and sat beside the bed without discussion, without the performance of competence, without asking her to reassure him that he had a right to be here. He began to speak in the old Pack tongue, not loudly, barely above a murmur, not the formal, authority-carrying words of an alpha decree. Those were for councils and official proceedings. The old words, the first ones, the ones that alpha wolves learned before they learned anything else, that carried in them the deep frequency of pack protection in its most ancient and biological form. You are safe, you are held, I am here. The thing that frightened you is not bigger than the thing that loves you. Saren sat on the other side of the bed and did not speak. She monitored Raven's vital signs with the trained precision of a healer and let Kaylin do the thing that was not in her power to do. She did not find this diminishing. She found it, after a long time of watching a man she had believed capable of love prove that he was, in the most fundamental and practical way, something closer to relief. The hours went as long vigil hours went, suspended, stretched, the world outside the window retreating until there was only the lamp and the bed and the steady cadence of Kaylin's low voice and Raven's chest rising and falling. The fever peaked at the deepest part of the night. It stayed at its peak for an hour that was the longest hour Saren had experienced since leaving Ironhollow. She held Raven's hand on one side. Kaylin held it on the other. They did not speak to each other. There was nothing to say that the situation was not already saying better. Then slowly, the heat began to release. By early morning, Raven's forehead was cool and dry. His breathing had steadied into the deep, even rhythm of a child properly asleep. His color had returned. The particular frightening brightness of the fever had gone out of him and left in its place the ordinary, wholesome warmth of a healthy boy. His eyes opened. He looked at Kaylin first, directly, with the absolute, unhesitating clarity of someone who has known exactly where you were through everything and is simply confirming what they already knew. "You stayed," Raven said. His voice was small and hoarse and entirely certain. Kaylin could not speak for a moment. The particular weight of those two words from this particular person seemed to arrive somewhere below the chest, below the place where language lived. "Yes," he said, "I stayed." Raven looked at him for another second, measuring, satisfied, the expression of someone for whom a fundamental question has just been definitively answered. Then his eyes closed. His body released into sleep with the complete, trusting ease of a child who has gotten what he needed and can now truly rest. Saren rose from the chair. She nodded toward the corridor. Kaylin followed her out. They stood in the narrow corridor with the lamp at the far end, and the sound of Raven's steady breathing through the open door. And it was the first time since his arrival that they had been in the same space without Raven between them or Aldrich in the room, or the professional distance of the practice to organize the air. "You stayed all night," Saren said. "Yes. You didn't have to stay." "I know." The silence between them was different from the silences of the previous days. Those had been managed, both of them working to contain what the air contained. This one had a different quality. The quality of two people who have just been through something real together and are on the other side of it, and there is no longer any point in pretending it wasn't real. "You hurt me," she said. She said it quietly, without heat, with the precision she brought to things that needed to be named accurately. Not in the way people hurt each other by accident or by fear or by being imperfect in ways they didn't intend. You looked at me in that hall and you made a calculation, and in your calculation I did not add up to enough. That is not something that goes away because you rode through the night. "No," he said, "it isn't." "Then what are you asking for?" He looked at her, not performing anything, not asking her to see something other than what was there. To earn whatever access you choose to give me, to accept whatever you choose to withhold, to be here for him, for both of you, not because I have any right to it, because I choose it, every day, without conditions, without a schedule, without requiring you to move faster than you're able to. She was quiet. The lamp at the end of the corridor made its small sound. Outside, Duskville was the silence of a town before dawn. "He told me a week ago that the Amber Wolf was coming," she said finally. "Told me the way he tells me things he already knows are true." She paused. "He was right." She turned and went back to Raven's room. "You can stay until morning," she said through the doorway. He went back in. He sat in the chair. He watched his son sleep. And in her room at the end of the corridor, Saren lay down on her bed and looked at the ceiling and did something she had not allowed herself to do in 2 years. She reached toward the bond, the scar, the silence on the left side of her chest that had been aching quietly since before she left Iron Hollow. She did not open it. She touched the edge of it the way you touch the edge of a wound you are checking, not to make it worse, and not to pretend it isn't there, but to understand its present condition honestly. What she felt on the other side of the scar was not what she had braced for. She had braced for Kaelin's presence the way she had known it in the healer's wing, warm, steady, the depth of it like standing in a river that carries a significant current. What she felt instead was something much smaller, something that had been sitting in the ruin of what he had done, waiting without expectation, not pushing at the walls she had built. Just waiting. She lay with that for a long time. Then she fell into the first real sleep she had had in 4 days. Maelys Grundorn's 3 wolves arrived 9 days after Kaelin came to Duskville, earlier than Aldrich had estimated. Someone at the border post had talked. They came on a clear morning when the first frost of the season had put a thin white skin on the cobblestones, and the market was still an hour from opening. 3 wolves in Iron Hollow formal authority colors, carrying a leather document case with the council seal. They knocked on the door of Saren's practice with the specific, measured patience of people who believed their documentation was sufficient. Saren heard the knock from her desk. She rose. She did not reach the door. Kaelin was already there. He stepped out into the cold morning air with the document case still unopened on the step, and stood in front of the 3 council wolves with his arms at his sides, and his amber eyes still, and his expression containing precisely none of the things a man performed when he was trying to be authoritative, and precisely all of the things a man carried naturally when he simply was. The lead wolf began to recite the statute. "Enough," Kaelin said. The word was quiet. It landed like something much heavier than its volume. "This child is Raven Dusk," he said. "He is my son. He has been under my protection since before you were given this assignment. You are going to take that document case back to Iron Hollow Keep and tell Maelys Grundorn that his interest in my son has been noted, and that if I see council authority in this town again without my direct invitation, the conversation I have with him next will be the last one he has in a professional capacity. Are we clear?" Not a question. The 3 wolves looked at each other. They looked at Kaelin. They performed the small formal bow that Iron Hollow law required when an alpha invoked direct paternal protection over a named child and left, quickly, with the particular posture of people who had just dramatically revised a situation they had arrived feeling confident about. Saren stood in the doorway. She watched them disappear around the far corner of the market square. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Your son," she said. He turned. Yes. He held her gaze with the steady attention of a man who was prepared for whatever came next, if you'll allow it. She looked at him. He did not add anything to that. He did not ask her to respond immediately. He simply stood in front of her practice door in the morning cold and waited. "Ask Raven," she said. That evening, she sat beside Raven on the floor of his room and asked him the question with the gravity she gave to all things she considered genuinely important. "The Amber Wolf wants to stay," she said. "What do you think?" Raven considered this. He looked at the doorway, where Kaelin was standing far enough down the corridor to be invisible but close enough to be aware, and then he looked at Saren. "He smells like the place I look for when I wake up scared," Raven said. He said it simply, factually, the way he said all things that were true. Then he handed Saren one of his blocks and returned to his arrangement with the satisfaction of a child who has delivered a verdict and considers the matter concluded. Saren held the block in both hands. She sat with what her son had said. Not just the words, but the specific truth in them, that Raven had been dreaming of a place he was looking for, and that place smelled like his father. That the bond echoes in his blood had been calling towards something for 2 years that had finally arrived. She did not want to let that move her faster than was honest. She was not a woman who confused being moved by something with being ready for something. Being moved and being ready were 2 different things, and she owed it to herself to know the difference. But she also did not push the feeling away. She let it sit, she let it be what it was. That night, she found Kaylin on the steps of the practice, looking at the sky above Duskville, which was clear and very cold, the first stars of winter more vivid than summer stars because the cold sharpened them. The snow that had been building in the clouds for a week had not yet come. She sat beside him, not close enough. The silence between them was the kind she had only ever felt with one person in her life. "I need you to understand something," she said. "Tell me. I am not the woman you sent away." She said it without anger, in the tone of a fact she needed him to carry accurately. That woman had a particular kind of openness about her that she earned back on her own over 2 years of doing the hardest thing she had ever done. What she is now is not the same openness. It is harder, more deliberate. She does not offer trust as a default. She does not make herself smaller to make anyone more comfortable. And she is not going to move at whatever pace feels comfortable to you. She will move at her own pace, and that is not going to change. "I know," he said. "Then what are you asking for?" He turned to look at her. The starlight caught the amber of his eyes. To stay. To show up every day and let the showing up speak for itself, because I understand that words from me are not worth what they were. To earn the right to be in this family in whatever way you decide that looks like, with no conditions and no deadline and no expectation that you will ever owe me forgiveness, because you don't. She looked at the stars for a long time. Then she reached toward the bond. Not cautiously, not with the tentative, testing touch of the night after the fever, deliberately, with her full attention, she opened it. Not all the way, not the unguarded openness of the beginning. Something more honest than that, the opening of a woman who has been through enough to know exactly what she is choosing and chooses it anyway. What came through was not warmth, not immediately. What came through was depth. The specific, enormous depth of Kaylin Dusk when he was not performing anything, when the alpha king and the political man and the version built for councils had been set aside, and what remained was simply him. Vast, quiet, carrying a grief and a relief so interwoven she could not tell where one ended and the other began. The sound he made was barely audible. An exhale. The exhale of a man who has been holding something at enormous effort for so long that the moment of release feels indistinguishable from falling. His wolf, which had been a weight for 2 years, went quiet, not healed, not restored to what it was, quiet in the way of something that has found its orientation after a very long time without one. "Don't waste it," Saren said. He looked at her. "I won't. Don't promise me that, just stay." He stayed. Iron Hello did not change the way change was supposed to look in stories. It did not change in a single dramatic session or a public proclamation or a moment of theatrical reckoning that the people of the Northern Territories would recount to their children. It changed the way a person changed after surviving something significant, slowly, in the body, one day at a time, driven not by the desire to be seen as changed, but by the simple daily practice of a man who had decided to do things differently and understood that deciding was only the beginning. Maley's Grundorn resigned 4 weeks after the morning his wolves came to Duskville. He resigned under pressures he had not anticipated, and in a fashion he did not enjoy, and the formal announcement was written with the particular administrative neutrality of a document that concealed a great deal of consequence in very ordinary language. Head Elder Osric spent 3 weeks making the arguments he had been making for 30 years and found, one by one, that they had less authority in rooms where the alpha of Iron Hello was present than they had once enjoyed. The noble families of the Northern Territories made their objections, negotiated their positions, and arrived where they always arrived eventually, at pragmatism. An alpha heir born of a true fated bond was an argument that the oldest wolf instincts recognized regardless of what political architecture preferred, particularly when that heir was Raven. Raven walked into Ironhollow Keep for the first time on a morning when the frost was still on the stones, and he was wearing a wool coat that he had already determined was an excellent coat, and had therefore decided to keep forever. He looked at the great hall. He looked at the tapestries on the walls. He walked to the center of the room, stood still for a moment with the measuring attention he brought to spaces he was taking in for the first time. Then he said, "The stones remember sad things." Standing beside him, Kalen looked down at his son. "Yes," he said, "they do. We should put something better in them." Raven looked up at his father with those amber eyes. "Can we do that?" "Yes," Kalen said, "we can." Vesna Oakholt came before the formal recognition ceremony. She came to Saren directly, which was the kind of thing that took more courage than most people gave it credit for, and sat in the chair across from her desk with the composed, clear-eyed honesty that had always been Vesna's particular quality. "I dissolved the arrangement formally 3 days ago," she said. "I wanted you to hear it from me." Saren waited. "I was told I was entering a match with a willing alpha," Vesna said. "I was not told that his wolf had already given itself entirely to someone else. That information was kept from me by people who believed political architecture was more important than the truth of it." She paused. "I was used, and so were you. And I want you to know that I understand that and that I am not your enemy and I never was." "Why are you telling me this?" Saren asked. "Because you deserve to hear a person say it, not a council document. A person." Vesna rose. "And because that boy you're raising deserves to grow up whole, not split between two worlds that could have been one if everyone involved had simply been honest from the beginning." She left. Saren sat for a long time after. She thought about what it cost a person to go toward a difficult conversation when the easier thing was simply to let the distance do its work. She thought about Vesna making that choice and felt, alongside the acknowledgement of what it meant, a specific gratitude that she had not expected to feel for a woman she had spent 2 years thinking of as an obstacle. People were more complicated than the roles they occupied in your story. She had been trying to remember that. Raven's recognition ceremony was small by Ironhollow's formal standards and enormous in every way that mattered. Saren wore a gown the color of winter cedar, deep green, simply cut, that Brynja had sent from Duskville with a note that said, "You deserve to look as complete as you are. I am very pleased with you. Do not write back until it is over." Raven attended with the focused gravity of a young wolf who understood that something significant was happening and had decided to be equal to it. He stood still during the formal acknowledgement. He shook the hands of 3 pack elders with the direct, unhesitating eye contact that adult wolves often failed to manage. He examined the formal seal on his recognition document with the interest of a person who finds physical artifacts of significant events worth understanding. Then he turned to Kalen and asked, with complete practicality, whether they were going to the stables afterward. They went to the stables. Saren stood in the ceremony hall after they left and let herself feel, carefully, in the way she did all important things, without rushing and without performing, the specific satisfaction of a woman who had survived something that was designed to reduce her, and had, in the surviving of it, discovered the full extent of what she was made of. She was not healed in the way that people meant when they used that word to describe a clean ending. She was healed in the way that something that has been properly treated and has recovered was healed, not without scar tissue, not without altered topography, not without the specific knowledge, permanent and structural, of what breaking felt like, but functional, actually functional, in full possession of her own life. That was better than the other kind of healed. On a Tuesday night, 5 months after Kalen arrived at her door in Duskville, Saren came down to the kitchen of the rooms they had taken in Ironhollow's East Wing. Not his formal chambers, not the healer's wing. Rooms they had chosen together over 3 weeks of careful negotiation that had been about more than furniture, and was both of them understanding that. He was at the table. Plain dark shirt, collar undone, the correspondence from the day's sessions in a pile that was nearly finished. He had the focused tiredness of a man who had been working for several hours and was coming to the end of it and knew it. He looked up when she came in. Something in his face did what it always did when she entered a room, settled. Not visibly, not dramatically. The private settling of a man whose wolf had found its orientation and felt the difference between every other configuration and this one. She put the kettle on. She moved through the kitchen the way she moved through places she knew well without watching her own hands, because her hands knew where things were. She was thinking about a patient she had seen that afternoon, a young wolf with a recurring injury that was not an injury, whose real wound she had located today, and whose face had done the particular thing that faces did when someone finally found the right place. "You're somewhere else," Kaylin said, not accusation, observation. "Patient," she said, "I found the actual problem today." "Is it fixable?" "Most things are, if you find them early enough." She brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from him. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the healer's wing 2 years ago, not performing attentiveness, not being careful about the arrangement between them, simply looking, with the full, natural attention of a wolf whose senses had found what they were calibrated for. "Are you happy?" he asked. He always asked, every few days at the end of the day, in the specific tone of a man who valued accurate information over comfortable assumptions. She thought about it honestly. The practice she was rebuilding in Iron Hello's healer's wing, which was already drawing patients that 3 other healers had categorized as beyond treatment. The morning she had spent last week teaching a group of apprentice healers the technique of sensing beneath the visible injury, watching their faces as they began to understand what she was showing them. Raven, asleep down the corridor, whose gifts were becoming more extraordinary by the month, and who faced them all with the same steady, purposeful seriousness he had brought to everything since the first night he found his mother's face. The bond between her and Kaylin, which she checked now with the same regular medical attention she brought to things that were healing and needed to be monitored honestly, which was no longer a scar, not restored to what it had been before the breaking. That version had been real but untested, and untested things did not know their own strength. This version was something different. The bond of 2 people who had chosen each other after knowing, completely and without illusion, exactly what the choosing cost. She reached across the table. She placed her hand over his. "I am home," she said. He looked at her hand over his. "That's permanent," he said. "Yes," she said, "that's the point." Outside the kitchen window, Iron Hello was receiving the first snow of the season, the committed kind, the kind that came down slowly and evenly, and with the complete intention of staying. The city below the window was going white. The torches in the great hall, which had burned for 300 years through the grief and the ambition, and the particular silence that followed decisions that couldn't be undone, were burning still. Raven was asleep. The bond between them was open and warm and steady in the way that only things which have been broken and rebuilt properly were steady. Not fragile, not dependent on everything going right. Strong in the places where the breakage had been, because those places had been repaired with full knowledge of what had failed and full intention of not failing there again. It was not a perfect life. It was a real one. And Saren Vale, who had walked out of Iron Hello keep into the rain with 2 years of work ahead of her and nothing behind her worth salvaging, had understood for a long time that real and perfect were not the same word, and that real was the better of the 2. She had built this, every piece of it, with her hands, with her wolf, with the stubborn, unglamorous, daily courage of a woman who had decided that surviving was not enough, and that the life on the other side of the breaking was worth building as beautifully as she knew how. It had cost her everything. It had given her more than she had known to want. The fire crackled, the snow fell, Kaylin's hand turned beneath hers and held on. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.